I'm going to start today with a quotation from Nisargadatta. Nisargadatta said, "Seeing I am nothing is wisdom. Seeing I am everything is love." And these few words sum up beautifully something that's very core to the seeing of non-duality. When talking about seeing I am nothing, Nisargadatta is referring to a sudden glimpse of emptiness. And in that glimpse of emptiness, it's realized that everything is empty. This, the self, is empty, and that, the external world, is also empty. And because they're both empty, they are, of course, the same thing. This does not actually exist in its emptiness. Well, how can that be said to be about wisdom, that seeing the emptiness of everything, including the emptiness of myself, is wisdom? The first assumption that might be made is, well, wisdom consists of something, some kind of knowledge, some kind of insight. In other words, something which is added to me. You know, perhaps I start out as foolish, and through application or luck, you know, I become wise. But that's not what's meant here at all, because the reason that the one where the seeing of emptiness has happened could be said to be wiser is not because wisdom has been added to them, but because folly has been taken away. In other words, something has been subtracted, not added. Now, when I say folly has been taken away, what I'm referring to is the fact that the person, the one who feels separate, the one who feels themselves to be real and existing within an external world, tends to carry within them a lot of stories. Stories about all sorts of things, but particularly stories about the meaning of existence, because the one who feels himself to be separate very often cannot resist the temptation of being attracted to and developing stories which suggest that my existence, my exquisite and precious existence, has some kind of meaning. And we're all aware of what some or many of these stories are. Some of them are the stories of religious beliefs, and some of them are the spiritual stories. There are other philosophical stories as well. So the one who feels themselves to be a person is quite likely to carry around inside them at least one, and possibly several, and possibly very many of these stories about meaning and purpose. And in a way, it sounds very harsh, this I know, but nevertheless, let us bear with it. In a way, these stories could all be said to be folly, because they are all trying to describe something which is indescribable, and they are all trying to, let us say, nail down something which cannot possibly be nailed down, to define something which cannot possibly be defined, and to assert that not only does this existence have some kind of meaning and purpose, but I, as the priest or the philosopher or the swami or whoever it might be, am able to determine what that meaning is. So we could say that any assertion that existence is about something other than simply it being itself is a kind of folly. It's a very popular folly. It's a folly that in apparent history has been followed by and committed by many a philosopher, many a spiritual teacher, many a religious leader. So even in a split second of seeing emptiness, it's quite likely that all of those stories will collapse, that they will all be, if you like, exposed as bankrupt. Because when it's seen that there is no one here at the heart of existence, then there is no one for whom any of these stories could make sense, or to whom any of these stories could apply. When it's seen that there is no one here, it's seen that there is no one, for example, taking tentative steps on a path to enlightenment. When it's seen that there's no one here, it's seen, for example, that there is no one who can either please or displease some creator God by their actions or by their inactions. And so what happens in awakening, sometimes, this doesn't always happen, but it's common enough to be worth commenting on, is that the stories of paths and purpose and meaning that we may have been carrying around with us, often consciously, sometimes only semi-consciously, because we may have just absorbed these stories in our childhood, for example, those stories are pretty likely to drop away or to collapse, leaving in their place an empty space. So a space which was until then filled with folly and is now simply an empty space, which may be filled by whatever is arising. So instead of a story about what I must do in order to appease an angry God so that I may not be punished and may go to heaven, instead of that story, the space which is suddenly left when it's collapsed may be filled, for example, with something very simple arising in this, such as a sip of coffee or the glimpse of a bird across the sky or the scent of a flower as it catches what seems to be my attention. So seeing I am nothing is wisdom, in the sense that folly tends to collapse. So after the seeing of nothing, there is no one who is any wiser, because there is simply no one. And yet, nevertheless, some more wisdom might arise and some less folly might arise. Okay, the second part of that saying is, from Nisargadatta, is seeing everything is love. I've talked about this before, so I won't talk about this perhaps for quite as long as I talked about seeing nothing. But seeing everything is seeing that I am love. Well, because seeing everything is the seeing that everything is love, that everything is unconditional love. So in the seeing of everything, I'm glancing down at the little page of rather scrappy notes that I made before I started this talk so that I wouldn't forget this quotation. So seeing everything involves the seeing that everything is unconditional love. This, by this I mean whatever is arising, is simply an outpouring of unconditional love. I'm not going to deal here with how outrageous this might sound to the mind. For the moment, I'm going to assume that the mind has been overthrown, and we might come back to this in another talk. But for now, for the mind that has been overthrown, there is the seeing that what is this apparent creation? What is nothing appearing as everything? It is love creating everything. So we might quarrel with the language again. We might say, well, seeing I am everything. Well, there is no I, so how can I see that I am everything? But forget about that. Language is tricky. It's impossible to talk about this without falling into language traps to some degree or other. Let's just forget about that. Be generous-hearted to the one who is trying to communicate about this, either talking about it or writing about it. Let us acknowledge that talking about and writing about non-duality is an impossible task, and it is a kind of folly even to attempt it. But having acknowledged that and therefore being generous about language, lets us, perhaps we can accept that there is a great deal of, well, there's a great deal of wisdom in Nisargadatta's saying there. Seeing I am everything, we could paraphrase that as simply seeing that there is simply everything. I am not in it because I do not exist. So simply seeing that there is just everything is to see that everything is unconditional love. Language and descriptions are so tricky. I am tempted here to say that everything is filled with unconditional love, or everything is radiant with unconditional love, or everything is created from unconditional love. And all of those phrases are, of course, at least a little bit misleading and perhaps highly misleading. All we can say is that when this is seen in its fullness, it's seen that the nature of that fullness is unconditional love. So in the seeing of emptiness, a great deal of folly may drop away. And in the absence of folly, wisdom may simply manifest itself. It has nothing to do with us. It has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with you. It may simply manifest itself. All sorts of things which may have been very puzzling, very, very difficult or impossible to understand for the seeker may suddenly fit into place or click into place if even a split second of emptiness is known. And so in that absence of folly, wisdom has arisen. It's nothing to do with me, nothing to do with you, but nevertheless that can occur. And then in the seeing of everything, there can be the wonderful recognition that the emptiness which is seen in awakening is also a full emptiness, and that fullness is the fullness of unconditional love. And so seeing I am everything, seeing there is only everything is love. And I shall leave it there for now.